Well, good morning, everyone. We've had a phenomenal few sessions as we start out. My name is Shawn van Raay, and I have the pleasure of being the Chief Information Officer at Payments Canada. It's a wonderful experience again to have Saba back, to have this fireside chat this morning. Today we're going to talk about driving innovation through open banking, collaboration, and competition. Saba, of course, was with me last year. We welcome her back. She's from Symcor. And as for those that, I'm sure most folks are familiar with Symcor, but it's a trusted technology partner, provider of payment, security, and data services, supports the largest organizations in Canada across a wide variety of sectors: banking, financial, insurance, government, and telecommunications. Saba's role as the Senior Vice President, Chief Strategy and Product Innovation Officer, Saba's responsible for the existing emerging product lines, overseeing teams that design and launch innovative services to address industry-wide challenges we all face. Her team is focused on ensuring long-term top-line growth as Symcor continues to provide critical services for the broader industry. Whew. Got that through. Saba, welcome. Welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Shawn. I'm so glad to be here, and I do apologize for my intro taking 2 minutes of our time. So.
I'll send you the bill later.
All right.
You got it. When we had you here last year, 12 months ago, we talked about a shared vision for Canada, what a successful framework would be in Canada for a made-in-Canada open banking solution. A lot's happened since then. So let's talk about what's changed in the last 12 months. What are your current areas of focus and priorities?
Yeah, for sure, Shawn, and I'm glad to be here because I think first of all, the energy in this room is fantastic. 1,800 attendees. A lot has happened in the open banking space, and I'm going to start with the end of last summer where Abraham completed his consultations, issued what we understand to be a very detailed report to the Department of Finance and to the Minister related to open banking, and that was followed shortly after by inclusion of open banking in the fall economic statement. And why that's relevant and important, that happened in November, is because you have to have an inclusion in the fall economic statement in order for budget to be subsequently allocated. If I go back to that fall economic statement time in November, in addition to sharing the intention to include open banking, the government actually issued a policy statement, and that policy statement was really important to give some clarity. There was a lot of feeling of, well, what happened in the consultations? What are the next steps? And so I appreciate that the Department of Finance took time to issue a policy statement that clarified the scope of open banking, the expectation that there would be an oversight and governance agency that would be assigned, outlining some of the high-level rules for who would be participating and not participating, opt-in or mandated to engage in open banking. You follow that by April. In April, there was an actual budget release that included funding for open banking, and maybe most importantly, the agency that would oversee and govern open banking was named as the FCAC. Budget was assigned both to the FCAC as well as continued funding for the Department of Finance, and that Department of Finance work, these are the guys who've been running with the policy statements for several years, and so they have continued funding to define that. Right after the budget, a few short weeks later, the government issued the first set of legislation, so the draft legislation for open banking, giving more details on the accountability for the FCAC, and a question that is on the top of many organizations' minds: what would be the technical standard? While they didn't name the standard, they outlined the rules for which a standard would be selected. So a lot of work has happened in the last 12 months on the government front. And what we've seen, Shawn, is that's been accompanied by continued industry progress. Back to that technical standard, we see a lot of volunteer efforts within the industry to try and align on a technical standard because people are already building. Even though the legislation is not fully materialized, people have started work. And a lot of that work we're seeing execute itself via bilaterals. So there are many organizations who have decided that there's a competitive advantage for them to be ready for open banking now and to not wait. And it's this really interesting interplay, Shawn, between competition and collaboration supported by government action.
Yeah, and you know, the last 12 months, the introduction of the legislation and more importantly, or as importantly, the funding, I think historically we'll look back at that. This is a seminal point. This is the opportunity for it to be a tipping point and really kick off the open banking in Canada, you know, and then let us catch up and let us really start to drive the value and learn from other jurisdictions. But I want to focus a little bit on that conversation around collaboration and competition. I think it's easy to think of those as competing forces. It's easy for us to look at our own organization and say, how do those collaborate? How do those competition work together to actually help drive innovation and actually drive progress.
Yeah, for sure. And Shawn, on the surface, you might think of collaboration and competition as opposing forces, but when it comes to open banking, I would argue they're actually two sides of the same coin. And what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at collaboration, for example. You know, you're participating in open banking today in one of two forms. You're either being mandated to do that because there's regulation coming or upcoming legislation, or it's already in place in many jurisdictions, or you're volunteering to do so. And this is in the case where you're a data provider or a data holder, the organizations that have the data that has to be shared with authorized third parties in order to bring forward innovative use cases. You're doing it because you're trying to mitigate the risk for your consumers who are currently only sharing this data today, primarily through credential sharing and screen scraping. So on the surface, Shawn, that's a compliance initiative. And how much do you prioritize compliance initiative? No, you're going to give me numbers or anything. We'll ask Christopher that later. But no offense, even if a compliance initiative in an organization gets funding, it's hard to get resources. And so that's where the collaboration component comes in. While in the short term, an organization may think that there's a competitive advantage to being more compliant than the next guy, it's not going to play out in the long term. So we see a lot of opportunity for collaboration, for organizations to work together to design a open banking framework. There's many of the rules have already been written and implemented in other jurisdictions to learn from those jurisdictions and to move forward with open banking and do that in a way that's going to be just more cost effective and efficient than if an organization were to do this on their own. So that's on the collaboration front. And then let's talk about competition, right?
Of course.
Competition's a good thing. It drives forward new ideas, it drives forward innovation, and that's better for all of us. In open banking, that's the real promise. Once you get past the whole, I got to get ready, I got to be compliant for open banking, I need to make the data available, which is the good thing to do and the right thing to do, what can you do with that data? And I'm not going to share the usual use cases, Shawn, that you hear about here when it comes to open banking.
Of course.
Personal financial management, embedded finance, those are all great, but I'm actually a big believer in the democratization of data overall. And so if they ever invite us back, Shawn, maybe they will, maybe they won't, I hope we're not talking about open banking. I hope we're talking about open data. And the promise of what a more democratized, authorized, secure, trusty ecosystem for data sharing can do for consumers, small businesses, and just Canadians as a whole. Take a look at the UK as an example. They've had open banking for years. They implemented it back in 2019. And even without additional legislation, they've actually started to move beyond banking into open energy. There's an open energy initiative where through a trust framework that has defined the security standards, the privacy standards, the user experience guidelines, the authority to use or not use data, there's a trust framework that's been created where organizations in the UK are freely sharing energy-related data. They have a net zero mandate by 2030, where the sale of net new internal combustion engine cars will be banned. So that's not a long time frame. And the sharing of data is actually helping organizations that are, at the heart of it, competitors, create more efficient and effective infrastructure to support the charging of electric vehicles. Otherwise, there was no sharing of this data, competing services were being stood up, the infrastructure to support that was not being shared. And why I share that is not an open banking example, but it's an open data, an open everything example, that through the democratization of data, some of the new and innovative services that can come about.
I think it's incredibly insightful, especially as we have the opportunity to look at other jurisdictions. We can look at, like you say, what the UK's done, and our opportunity here is that we can learn. We can see the journey they've taken, and we have the opportunity to choose and figure out where in our journey we want to start and what we want to do. So on that note, knowing that formally in 2025, we're starting to see some real energy, and I'll take you up on your offer. We'll do a data conversation next year back up here at the same time, same place. But when the organization, the ecosystem start to look at 2025, how can they get ready? It's not that far away. We've seen the other jurisdictions, the journeys they're on. We have an opportunity to define our journey. How do we get ready?
Yeah, and I love that, Shawn, that we have to take control, and we have to. It's on all of us in the Canadian ecosystem to move open banking forward here in Canada. From our experience, it can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months if we go back to that compliance component of open banking, which is where open banking starts. but is not where it ends. It moves beyond compliance to innovative services. But if you're looking to get ready for open banking and you are an organization that will eventually be mandated, as the draft legislation has indicated, as the policy statement has indicated, to provide data to authorized entities, that 12 to 18 months window, that clock is ticking now. And you have to prepare. But back to no competitive advantage to a compliance initiative, you don't have to do that on your own. I'm a firm believer that in these cases, this is where collaboration really comes to the fore. You should work together. There are many organizations, certainly not just Symcor, who are in the Canadian industry, have gone beyond studying open banking to implementing open banking. Leverage those trusted partners, work those organizations to move ahead. So that's one thing, is just partner with the right organizations and look at their track record, the security, the trust capabilities, use them for guidance on the standards that you should follow in the absence of that being fully published now. And the other aspect, I think, and that's incumbent on all organizations, is to really, really focus on consumer adoption. The Department of Finance most recently shared a number, which is incredible to me, that 9 million Canadians are already sharing their data with third parties, but only through credential sharing and screen scraping. That's mind-boggling. After all the public service announcements about not giving away your username and password, that's exactly what's happening. So we've got to move away from that untrusted system to a trusted system, an open banking ecosystem. So prioritizing consumer adoption is going to be really key, designing powerful, impactful, simple, consistent user experiences right from the time that a consumer grants consent at a recipient, whether that be a bank or a fintech, to the time that the consumer authorizes the details of what they're going to share at their data provider or that data holder, to the time that they're managing their consent. End to end, we have to prioritize ways to encourage consumer adoption through simple, clear, and concise user experiences.
And I think those are some phenomenal next steps, especially, you mentioned compliance a few times. And compliance is a great starting point. It's a great leaping off, but it doesn't drive hearts and minds. And it doesn't drive the passion and the value and how do we get creative, right? Compliance is what it is. It's compliance. I got to do it, so I do it. I think what you're talking about is the opportunity to say, that's my starting point. How do I actually engender and bring that passion, that hearts and minds of my team, the ecosystem together to really drive something different for Canada? I think that's important. So as we close up, I want to give you the opportunity to sum up a little bit and give some key takeaways for us. And what are the 3 key ingredients for success? And I think many of us are going to go back and start looking at what we're doing in the next 12 months, knowing 25 is around the corner, knowing that's 12 to 18 months isn't far. What are the 3 key ingredients?
Yeah, Shawn, and maybe I'll just build on your point first. This is not meant to be a compliance initiative, open banking. That is not the promise of open banking.
Exactly.
The promise of open banking, to your point, are better services for consumers and small businesses alike. If you look at other examples, in many jurisdictions, the initial adoption for open banking was actually quite low. In the UK, only 11, started out with about 5% of users in 2019 who were leveraging open banking. As of 2023, that number is now 11%. Small and medium businesses are leading the way. 17% of small and medium businesses in 2023 are leveraging open banking services to consume data and provide more impactful user experiences. And that's really relevant in Canada when you think that 90% of the Canadian population is actually employed at small and medium businesses. And so if we can create better experiences, not only for consumers, for businesses alike, better cash flow management, accounting, access to capital, that's a good thing. So I don't want to certainly lead the audience with the impression that this is just about compliance. It's about the future that it can bring forward. But you asked for the 3 key takeaways and maybe ingredients for success. So last year, I had shared with the audience that in my opinion, it was incentives, collaboration, and trust. And I spoke about incentives because if you are going to at least initially focus on the compliance aspect of open banking, if you just do that and you wait for the rules to be written and you follow the letter of the law, it's going to happen, but it's going to take time and it's probably not going to be all that great to begin with. And so it's important for the right incentives to be in place, even if that is simply the deferral of costs or the mitigation of heavy costs. So we're going to put that aside for a second. Collaboration and trust for me are table stakes for open banking. I hope I've made the case that it's all really on all of us as an industry to collaborate to bring this about. It's not just on the government, it's not just on banks, it's not just on fintechs, it's not just on service providers and policymakers. Trust is the cornerstone of open banking. The system that we operate in today is untrusted. You saw the numbers for fraud. that Rahul shared. The rules and regulations for how that data is used, stored, accessed, revoked, deleted after the fact are not clear, and they need to be set out. So we need to move towards a trusted open banking ecosystem. And maybe the third ingredient that I'll share this year is about preparation. Back to, we've all been talking about it for a long time. It's time to get real. It's time to prepare and to act as an industry to bring about open banking in Canada. The government has done a really good job of laying out their perspective, the high-level scope, who's going to participate, how can they participate, the expectation that there will be accreditation rules. There are some questions to be answered, but you don't have to answer those questions on your own. So if I leave the audience with anything, the time for us to act is now.
Well, thank you. I think it's been a phenomenal, where we spoke about last year, the change that's happened in the last 12 months and the conversation this year and what we're looking forward to next year. I promise you we'll be back on stage, same time, same place. And hopefully it's a conversation about open data.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Great to see you again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.